Okay, now I talked about this a little bit before, but I'm going to reiterate this time how Calliphoridae locate their resources. So we looked at their basic morphology. Now we're going to see how they find things like dead bodies or open wounds or decomposing material. The reason that I go over this several times is because I want you to be able to use this information when you're out at a scene. You want to think about, okay, we've got these Calliphoridae. This is how they're going to find their potential resources. This will help inform us about things going on with a body. Let's say I have a body that doesn't have flies on it for one reason or another. I can go through all this ecology that I know about these Calliphoridae and start to think about why wouldn't those insects have, or why wouldn't their insects have found that body in time? So it's a very, very complex system. So I'm going to go over the very basics and then sort of go through some of the weird things that can happen. So blowflies are among the first insects to detect and colonize human remains. So in experimental studies, Calliphorids have been recorded to arrive at carcasses within minutes of their exposure. This is one of the assumptions that we make when we find flies on a dead body, that they showed up very, very quickly after death. So quickly, in fact, that the resolution just doesn't really matter to us. So they show up almost immediately after death. However, you want to take that with a grain of salt. It is an assumption. We are assuming that those things show up, that these flies are able to find the body very quickly. There are a lot of reasons why they can't. Okay? They may not find the body because maybe their olfaction doesn't quite pick up those body scents. Maybe the visualization doesn't work. Maybe there aren't oviposition sites. There's a lot of things that are happening. So this is the assumption that we make. They show up very quickly after exposure. Now, blowflies will locate the remains in a two-step process. So it begins with the chemical detection of the body. They do this via the receptors in their antennae. So remember, back to the antennae, we've got these aerostate antennae on the Calliphoridae. They've got their arista right at the end. Remember, it's plumose arista in the Calliphoridae. Right there. Got our plumose arista. Those plumose arista, each one of those hairs has a nerve ending inside of it. These are studded with pores filled with hemolymph so that all those chemicals that are floating around in the air, they can smell them. This is their olfaction. Okay, so they will start looking for a body with olfaction, or they will pick up the first hints of a dead body or decomposing remains or a big festering open wound by smelling it. Okay, they will also use a visual search in conjunction with this scent to find likely areas. So think about the way this has to work. You've got this little tiny fly. Remember way back when we talked about the surface to volume ratio, these things are small. What seems like a pretty small distance to us is actually huge to these flies. They don't have a lot of excess energy. So they are going to spend as little energy as they possibly can trying to find the most likely place for protein resources and for places to oviposit. So they're going to use these big compound eyes that they have to start looking for likely areas for dead bodies. So you'll see flies just sort of flying around, maybe stopping and resting in forested areas, maybe stopping and resting in open fields, places where they have evolved to expect dead bodies. That's why we see some able to really thrive among human habitation, because they have evolved with humans and they understand that we throw stuff out and all that sort of thing. So they're able to find it. So they use this visualization in order to find likely areas where you're going to find these carcasses or things like that. Then they can pick up this olfaction or the scents in the air. And what they do is they pick up little molecules of, say, cadaverine or some sort of dead body scent, whatever it is they happen to be cueing in on at that point. There's a lot of research into this. You don't need to know that for the purposes of this class, but they will cue in on some sort of nasty smell, at least to us, and they can pick out this smell at really, really dilute amounts in the air. Then they're going to try to follow those molecules upwind. So they're looking for these molecules, looking for denser and denser pockets of molecules in the air or on the wind. And as they get more and more dense, they are trying to get back to the source of this scent. It's kind of like, you know, when you wake up in the morning, you smell coffee or bacon or something, you sort of follow your nose. Same idea. They're just looking for the source of this scent. Okay, so they are trying to find it. Now, think about for a minute then, what can block them from actually finding the scent? They're in an area that they visually recognize as perhaps having some bodies at some point or some resources. They are looking for a scent. What happens if the wind is going in the wrong direction? What happens if there's another overwhelming scent? Let's say they're near a sewage plant. There's a lot of decomposition happening there, right? Are they going to be able to tell a dead body from that sewage plant? Maybe, maybe not. Okay? What if that body doesn't give off these really strong odors? So we talked a little bit about the bacteria on the body and how those bacteria are one of the things that govern these scents. What happens if the bacteria just aren't proliferating? What happens if somebody died in the midst of chemotherapy? All those bacteria are dead. These flies aren't going to have those scents that they're normally cueing in on. What happens if a body is frozen? What happens if a body is really, really tightly wrapped or it's not decomposing for some reason? So all those things need to be taken into account. That's why we call this an assumption. We assume that they show up very quickly, but we have to understand that there might be other reasons that they're not there. So whenever I look at a case where there aren't flies on the body, if somebody calls me and says, could you figure out why? I go looking for reasons as to why the flies may not have found that body. So we assume first and foremost that, okay, let's assume that the body was there. It wasn't dumped at some other time. Start there, okay? Assuming the body was there, let's look around. Is there any reason that the flies may not have shown up? And you can think about things like, well, what if the flies weren't there to begin with? Maybe it's an area that the flies just didn't recognize as potentially having dead bodies. Maybe it was an area that is highly managed, so people spray pesticides. So if flies did show up, they died. So the closest flies are miles and miles away. There's going to be other things in there. They might eventually find this body, but as they get closer, they might die. That could be a problem. Okay, maybe the body isn't giving off a scent for one reason or another. So there's all these things you need to go into. So if you can't figure out anything else like that, then you have to go into, okay, maybe the body wasn't there. What is going on with that? So only after you really eliminate everything else can you even say, okay, they didn't find the body because the body wasn't there. So I have a big problem. This is me just going to be on my soapbox for a minute. I almost apologize. I have a big problem with forensic entomologists that say things like, well, the flies didn't show up within minutes, therefore the body couldn't have been there. Or, oh, they must have died at night. Or they couldn't have been there the day before because there would have been flies all over them. Unless they really go into detail as to why the flies would have been there, then that is a huge assumption, and I have a problem with that because you don't know. I have run experiments that I've been to the body farm where you have one body that is just fully covered with maggots, fully covered with flies, a body maybe 3 feet away, not covered at all. They were put out at exactly the same time. So what is it that means one body gets attacked or one body gets infested and the other one doesn't? We don't know yet. So to say that under all circumstances, no matter what, these flies will show up very quickly, that is a dangerous position to put yourself in. So if you ever see me giving an interview or you read one of my papers or you see me in court and somebody asks me, well, why wouldn't the flies have shown up right away? I'm going to be coming up with 1,000,001 ways to say, I don't know. And lawyers hate that, let me tell you. And so they'll ask me like 4,000 different ways. What about this? And I'll be, maybe, perhaps. So I just use a thesaurus to figure out, I don't know, and maybe in many, many different forms. Fun. Okay, so off my soapbox a little bit. So anyhow, let's say, though, that you've got a body and it's giving off scents and there are flies in the area. These flies are going to follow those molecular cues, those olfactory cues upwind, they're going to come into close proximity with the body or with the carcass or with the open wound. And then they're going to switch again from that olfactory driven search to a visual search. So this kind of makes sense as well, right? Once you reach this area where the scent is emanating from, then the whole area is just covered in that scent, right? Have you ever smelled fresh baking bread in the downtown area? You sort of like turn a corner and it's the whole street. Oh, which building is it? Where's the bakery? Then you have to start looking for the signs that says bakery here, and then you can go in and get your free fresh bread, right? So same idea. So it's the scents are now just overwhelmed. Everywhere they turn, it's going to smell delicious. Now they have to find with their eyes where that particular body is. So they move into this visual search. So they're going to visually locate the carcass, and they're going to assess the size of the carcass. They're going to look for a location in order to feed and in order to oviposit. Okay, so flies are often observed walking extensively over the surface of the body. This will help them determine the best place for them to either feed or to lay their eggs. Okay, so what they do is they will locate this body amongst this huge plume of delicious smells, and they usually land just slightly upwind of that body, and they walk back to it. Okay, so they are looking for natural bodily openings and wounds. These are places, these are breaks in the skin, these are breaks in the outer dead surface of the body that will allow for the flies to get in, for the maggots to feed. Okay, so they're going to walk across the surface of the body. They are going to survey the remains, and they're going to taste this resource. So they have these little taste receptors that are found on their body, on their legs, and on their tarsi. So they can actually taste with their feet. So they're looking for the best tasting place, the place that is open, and you're going to see these flies walking, and as the taste receptors on their tarsi come into contact with something that might be delicious, then they're going to extend those sponging mouth parts, and they're going to taste it even more. Once they determine, yes, this is great, this is a big old open wound, this is the mouth, this is the nose, this is the vaginal or the anal opening somewhere, then the females are going to oviposit. So the adults do prefer to lay their eggs in natural bodily openings and wounds because these allow for protection of the eggs and of the first instar larvae, and it gives the young larvae access to soft tissue on which to feed. So this is how we see these Calliphoridae finding the body and then choosing where to oviposit. And the reason this is important is because this helps you figure out where to potentially find larvae in a body. So if you get called into a scene and it's a relatively fresh body, if you don't see any open wounds, you're going to start checking in those natural bodily openings. The tinier maggots really can't handle being dried out. They can't handle a lot of sunlight. So they're going to be in the mouth, they're going to be in the nose, they're going to be in the vaginal and the anal openings, those sorts of places. Okay, so you're going to see the decomposition happening there. It's going to be accelerated by the maggots. And if you need to find some maggots, those are the places to go. Okay, now, alternatively, if there are wounds, you're going to see maggot masses in very strange places. So if you get a body that has, it's normal decomposition in the head, in the abdominal regions, but they also have, say, maggot masses in the palms of the hand, that's not where a natural bodily opening is. There was likely wounds there. Because usually we'll see the palms of the hand or places of that nature that are big places for mummification to start very quickly because the maggots just can't get there. If maggots can get there, there was an opening of some sort there. Okay, so you're looking for wounds. So this can tell you a lot about what's going on, just knowing where they like to oviposit and how they're going to find those openings. Now, one interesting exploitation of Calliphoridae is the use of cadaverine and other carrion smells to attract pollinating flies to a particular flower called the corpse flower. So if you have ever seen something like this, these are sort of the tabletop versions of the corpse flower that I show you here. There's also really large corpse flowers that are in a lot of museums. In the Houston Natural History Museum, they have a really big one. It will only bloom once every few years, and if you go when it's blooming, it smells like a rotten body. What this thing is doing is, instead of coming up with those beautiful flower smells that we associate with pretty flowers, because those flower smells are metabolically expensive. They're going to be giving off this scent to attract butterflies and birds and maybe humans, whatever they have evolved with. These flowers, on the other hand, these have evolved with flies. They figured out, if I may be so anthropomorphic, they figured out that flies prefer feeding on decomposing matter. So they're basically tricking the flies here. They're saying, hey, here's the dead body. And the flies are going to use that same searching method. They're going to scent this cadaverine. They're going to scent these really nasty smelling substances. They're going to fly upwind. They're going to find the source. In this case, the source instead is this little nectary, the center of these flowers. Instead of being a body, they're going to land on it. They're going to do the searching patterns. And the cadaverine is so strong that sometimes we see these flies actually laying their eggs in here, which is really just a rude awakening for the first instar maggots, but whatever. But while the flies are doing this, they are picking up pollen. So then they're going to go in here. They're going to notice there's no protein. They're maybe going to get a little bit of nectar, maybe some sugar if the flowers provide that. Then they're going to go to another flower that smells like cadaverine, and they're going to cross-pollinate. So these corpse flowers, these cadaver flowers, have actually exploited this olfaction in these Calliphoridae, and instead of going the sweet scent, they've gone this nasty scent. You can actually own these things, and they smell like dead bodies. So if you hate your roommate, get one of these. Now you know. All right, so that is the basic ecology of the Calliphoridae. Let me know if you have any questions.